There is 3 stupid mistakes I make with watercolor that are holding me back, and they might be affecting you too, and you don't even know it. The worst thing is these mistakes are so simple, but they have a great effect on how good your work looks in the end. So I want you to learn from my mistakes so you can paint more confidently and easily by the end of this video. I will throw 1 or 2 bonus mistakes for those who listen to the whole video. When we first start out painting, what is the first thing that we do? We go to our art store or shop online for some cheap art supplies. And there's nothing wrong with buying cheap art supplies. The problem is what those supplies contain. One of those tools that they contain is so small that it leads your paintings to look overworked, patchy, and overall jagged. And I think you know what I'm talking about, and that is using a small brush. Let's step into the kitchen for a little bit. When you make soup and you want to serve that soup, do you use a teaspoon? Of course not. You will use a ladle, because otherwise it will take forever to serve the soup. So using a small brush for a big area of painting is just the same principle. It will take you a lot more brush strokes to cover the whole area with a small brush than with a big brush. And that seems like it should be common sense, but it isn't, and I'm guilty of that. But that's not the worst mistake ever. Now let's think about going up to a mountain and it's full of snow. Now you want to trek up that mountain and you have, let's say, 3 options. One is some cheap pair of shoes. Second is some a little bit more expensive snowshoes. And the third one is the more expensive skis. Which of these items is gonna be the best for you to get up there and get down in the most efficient way possible? Probably the skis, right? Or the snowshoes. So why do we always pick the cheap shoes? The one thing that's gonna make it really hard for us to get up there and get down in the most efficient way without just killing ourselves because it's so hard to walk through snow. That is the same thing that we're doing when we're buying the wrong kind of paper, the cheap watercolor paper. You don't need to buy the skis, you don't need to buy the most expensive paper, but at least not pick the most cheap one. Alright, since we're in the mountains, since there's snow outside, let's go back to our cabin and heat up a little bit. When we get there, we see that the thermostat is off, and so we turn it on. And 5 minutes later, we want to be warm, but of course it's not warm, we just turned on the heater. This is the same thing that happens when we're trying to paint with watercolors that are dry and we don't activate the paint before we start painting. And that's my bonus tip, because that's the one mistake that I commit most of the time, if not all the time. But the one mistake that can really hold you back is this. And we're gonna continue on the cabin analogy because I'm kind of liking it and actually it's pretty much applicable. So when you go out on a road trip, or in this case a cabin trip, and you're gonna buy food, how much food do you need to buy? Of course, this depends on how many people are joining you and for how long you're gonna be there, or even how hungry you get between foods, because I mean, I'm quite snacky. I'm a snacky person. If the food represents the paint and the time that you spend in the cabin represents the area of the canvas that you need to cover, then the biggest mistake that we all make is not having enough food, or actually not mixing enough paint. Every second that we spend mixing again a color that we were using gives the paper more time to dry, and therefore you're not able to go back and paint wet and wet. Now that I think about it, I never have this problem. I mean, not having enough food in the cabin. We usually buy too much food, or we bring too much food. I should be able to apply that to my watercolor painting. In this case, mixing enough paint, of course. Now I really want to go on a cabin trip. Message to my soon-to-be wife: if you're listening to this, let's go on a cabin trip. But now that you know those mistakes, that's not enough for you to avoid them. There's a very good exercise that you can do to really turn all these mistakes into really good habits. And you can watch this video right here to learn how. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.